Welcome back to TechNet Radio. Kevin Remde, Tom Shinder, and Yuri Diogenes are back for part 2 of their private cloud basic series, and in today's episode they discuss security and how it relates to the private cloud. Tune in as they chat about various factors businesses need to consider, such as ease of use, potential differences between traditional infrastructure security measures, as well as some advice on who and where to turn to for security advice. Kevin, the mic is yours.
Hello everyone, welcome to another Cloud Innovators show on TechNet Radio, the series of interviews for IT managers. My name is Kevin Remde and I'm a Senior IT Pro Evangelist in the U.S. Developer and Platform Evangelism team, and I'm your TechNet Radio host today. So in today's discussion, which is part 2 of 5 parts, we're going to discuss the important topic of security and how it relates to the private cloud. And with us today, we're very fortunate again to have Tom Shinder and Yuri Diogenes. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hello, Kevin.
Great to be here. Hey.
Yep.
So quick, yes, very good to see you. So very quick introductions here. Tom Shinder has been done a lot of things in the past, not only as an IT consultant, but even prior to that, he was actually a doctor of medicine. He's gone into IT for many years, an author of a good number of books on Windows networking, Windows security. ISO server is where I first learned about Tom, and in fact, I took great advantage, Tom, of your blog, your website and your blog, isoserver.org. So thank you for that. Way past due for those thanks. Tom's been with Microsoft since December of 2009. He's a member of the UAG, or at the time was a member of the UAG Direct Access team. He started the popular EdgeMan blog that covered UAG Direct Access. Tom's currently a Principal Knowledge Engineer in the Server and Cloud Division, Information Experience Group Solutions Group. It's a nice mouthful. And his primary focus is now in private cloud. He has special interests in private cloud networking and security. Yuri Diogenes has been with Microsoft is with Microsoft as a senior technical writer in the Server and Cloud Division Information Experiences Group. And prior to this, Yuri also worked in Windows Security and worked in Microsoft CSS as a senior security support escalation engineer in the Forefront Edge security team. He's also co-author of the Forefront TMG Administrator's Companion book from Microsoft Press, co-author of 3 other books about Forefront, UAG, TMG, and PFE from Microsoft Press, and also co-author of a Security Plus book in Portuguese. Currently, Yuri and Tom are both working on writing a new book, actually, a Windows Server 2012 Security from End to Edge and Beyond. And it's going to be published by Syngris. Is that right? Syngris. It's going to be the publisher in 2013, so coming up this next year. Gentlemen, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, so in part 1, we described the idea of the private cloud, and we gave our viewers and listeners an introductory look at what the private cloud is and what the benefits are. And as with anything else having to do with how we handle our business information, our customer data, our business knowledge, we have to consider security. Or do we? Does it change with the private cloud?
Well, that's a good question, and I think as a lead-up to that, I want to make clear that we understand the difference between public cloud and private cloud. So last time we got together, we talked about what a cloud is. Okay, the cloud has the 5 essential characteristics of cloud computing as defined by the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. Now, a lot of people seem to think that private cloud is aligned with a service model. And what is a cloud service model? There are essentially 3 cloud service models. There's infrastructure as a service, where the cloud service provider provides the core compute, storage, and networking infrastructure. There's platform as a service, where the cloud service provider provides not only the infrastructure, but also the development and deployment platform. And then there's software as a service, where a complete, quote, finished service is made available to consumers of the cloud. So we've got 3 service models, and then we've actually got 4 deployment models, but let's just stick with the 2, public cloud and private cloud. The only difference between public cloud and private cloud, for all intents and purposes, is that a private cloud is an infrastructure dedicated to a single organization, A public cloud is a shared infrastructure dedicated to multiple organizations where maybe some of those organizations may be at cross purposes. So I like to say a cloud is a cloud is a cloud. The only difference is that the private is dedicated to one organization, public is dedicated to multiple. So why is private cloud important? Many argue that private cloud is important because of the security implications. Because there's only a single organization involved, that means you have command and control over the security infrastructure. Now, that may or may not be correct in terms of, is private cloud overall more secure than public cloud? And some may argue that public cloud may actually be more secure because they have more financial resources. The public cloud providers have more financial resources to get better security instrumentation, better resource partitioning, more highly trained security professionals than an enterprise might have. But on the other hand, the enterprise might say that because of especially the broad network access component of a public cloud, private clouds tend to de-emphasize the broad network access component because many of them are private because they want to, optimize the security of their solution.
Okay, so I mean, it is a huge topic, and certainly considering all the different opinions and certifications and the things that kind of frame the discussion around security and the things to consider around security. We'll get into some of those different methodologies and whether or not they apply, the things that we've been doing in the past apply to in this new world of a private cloud versus a public cloud. I mean, this is a very big topic and certainly many different aspects to consider. So private cloud isn't necessarily going to make things easier, is what I'm gathering from what you're saying here.
Well, if you think as easier, the only trick thing about this question is that some people think is easier means more secure, and that could be very tricky because if you start thinking that you are more secure just because you implement a private cloud, you might go just wrong because you will not be diligent to find the holes and mitigate them, right? It's not because you are in a private cloud that you'll be more secure just because of this transition. You still have vulnerabilities in place. You still have to mitigate those vulnerabilities. It's just that now you have a new threat landscape in front of you that you need to work and see exactly what you need to mitigate. It will be easier to manage because you're going to have more tools. You're going to have different ways to look at things. So it will be more predictable. But at the same time, again, there are different ways to exploit a private cloud, mainly because you need to start in an assumption that the internal user is already authorized and authenticated, which means that is already internal of the network, is part of the network. So the main threat is within already. Okay, and you cannot only trust because the internal threat is still growing. According to many reports that we see in the market today, the internal threat is still as dangerous as the external one because it already have access to things. And many times people do things not because they are malicious, but just because they do not know. So in a private cloud, if you have all the security controls in place, you're still going to have the user that is capable of bypassing things and doing an operation that he's not supposed to do, like open a phishing mail that was filtered by your spam filter, but he's still curious to see what's going on there and move the email from the junk mail to the inbox and open blah, 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 things like that. So it's still going to happen. So I will say it's going to be easier to manage, but the threat landscape is different and you should still need to be very diligent in addressing all the possibilities from this new threat landscape that is upon you.
So in the sense or the context of addressing those issues, and I guess I'm thinking again about kind of the more traditional methods we've been using to secure our traditional infrastructures. Are there new methods that we need to consider with regard to a private cloud?
Well, I think one of the core security issues in a private cloud comes from the fact that it's a shared service. So dealing with the fact that we have a shared service, even though the private cloud is dedicated to a single organization, there are divisions within the company that don't necessarily want to share information with one another. And we've seen that within Microsoft too. The Windows people don't necessarily share all their information at all times with the Exchange people, vice versa, and a number of permutations around that. So isolation is really key. So when we think about a private cloud infrastructure, we need to think about how are we going to isolate tenants from each other from a compute perspective, which means how does the hypervisor handle the issue of compute partitioning among the tenants from a storage perspective and from a networking perspective.
It sounds like you're talking about not necessarily private cloud, as our data center is a cloud, but now you're talking about multiple clouds. I mean, you're defining a domain or a compartmentalization of authentication or authorization where, yeah, you might have these different groups that don't necessarily or probably shouldn't even have any kind of interaction, and we can actually define those as clouds.
Exactly.
Or tenants, right?
Or tenants, yeah.
Right.
So we become a public cloud provider or a cloud provider for our customers, which are internal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about a cloud is a cloud. So if you're providing cloud services within an enterprise in a dedicated infrastructure, you're a cloud service provider, and you need to take on a cloud service provider's approach. And you need to define what is your responsibility as a provider versus what the customer or the business units that will be using the cloud infrastructure, what their responsibilities are. I see as a provider, in terms of security, we're responsible for making sure that infrastructure is updated, that we have processes and procedures in place to make sure that the cloud infrastructure is not compromised and that one tenant can't compromise the next tenant. It's up to the consumer of the cloud service to handle the security of the services that they run. We'll make sure they don't compromise the infrastructure, because a single guest that can compromise the entire infrastructure can create a catastrophic situation that can bring the entire cloud down. But if their services are unsecure and they open themselves up to compromise or whatever, we have to define what their responsibilities are. Now, we may, as a service provider, do a value-added service where we'll help them secure their applications and services, but it's also reasonable for the provider to say, you're on your own and you use your own methods for securing your piece of the environment.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it becomes a matter of not necessarily being all, certainly overall we're responsible for the security and certainly the reliability and stability of our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it sounds like what you're proposing is that there's a certain amount of delegation that we can do. We can give ownership to certain aspects of what actually does become a security topic around those, the different clouds, the different people that are responsible for their different pieces of the organization.
Exactly.
Now, along with that, and what can actually grow to be somewhat of a complex environment, I would think that there has to be some person in charge or some role that is kind of an architect. And in fact, I use the words the architect because this is a term that you guys used when you delivered an excellent talk on private cloud security at TechNet earlier this year, this architect role. So tell me a little bit more about what that role is and who in our business, which business leaders, which IT person, whoever it is, who should we consider for assigning this role to?
Great question, because I usually start that talk. The talk was entitled Private Cloud Principles, Concepts, and Patterns. And beginning of that talk is about the role of the cloud architect. We have seen reports where some people are predicting a contraction of the number of people in IT who will be performing the traditional infrastructure and operations role. So the racking and stacking, the cabling, the typical application maintenance stuff, the keeping the lights on, if you will, type of work. And while these people won't necessarily be leaving IT, they'll be evolving their roles. And Gartner and other research organizations have seen what they believe to be a big increase in the architect role. And I think the architect role is really important, especially when we talk about cloud security, especially private cloud security, because we think of private cloud security as a wrapper around everything in the private cloud, from the infrastructure to the platform to the software that drives the private cloud infrastructure. So we need to have an architect so that we don't rebuild the stuff that we have in our data center. You know, our data centers are managed messes, I would say. And the reason why they're that way is because they just sort of grew that way. You know, technology was quickly changing. People wanted to adopt new hardware, new software, and so the data centers don't really look like what you would want them to be if you were able to start over. So I see private cloud as providing us the ability to get a mulligan for us to start over and architect the data center environment we always wanted, but just couldn't do because of exigencies of the past.
Interesting. Yeah, we get a do-over. That's nice.
That's right.
Excellent. So in the past, and considering this do-over, this mulligan in terms of our security of our data centers and our information, you know, we talked in the past about defense in depth. We had this approach that meant we had to address every different layer, every different aspect, from the physical plant to the application layers to the networking and the firewalls and the external access, and many others. Has this changed because of the private cloud?
I love this type of question because people that were working with security for so many years, they did, just like you said, they followed this defense in depth approach for years and years, and this is the foundations of everything. And with private cloud, it really does not change that much. It only adds more layers that you need to defend, to be honest with you, because now you're gonna have to be concerned about different aspects of your line of defense. There is no such a thing as perimeter network or DMZ anymore. Everything is internal. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have firewall, because at the end of the day, your private cloud at some point will connect it to the internet to do other type of business. Or you might have a hybrid cloud where you're going to have some sort of connectivity between your private cloud and a public cloud. So there are different layers that you need to tackle and you need to identify. So the risk assessment of your environment and identify those points will lead you to invest on the right technologies for the defense in depth approach. Always look into a protection in multiple layers until you reach the data itself. It's very important today to protect the data itself. So that's why some investments that Microsoft has done on Windows Server 2012 are really to protect data. For example, the BitLocker on CSV clusters. That's a big deal because now you can have BitLock implement on your cluster environment. And when you're talking about private cloud, most likely you're going to have clusters all around moving resources and everything, and you want to protect that data. And you also want to have physical security in place. If someone steals that server from your data center, or something happens when someone tries to boot up on that server, you might have other mechanism that will prevent that data from leak. So you need to be concerned as the same thing as in the past, and now with some additional layers. So risk assessment is very important. Identify which layers do you have, identify how to protect those layers, and make sure that your endpoint is secure. Another misconception is that with cloud, the endpoint is not as a big deal as it was in the past, but that's just wrong, because your endpoint will continue to be very active. At the end of the day, with this new bring your own device era, we should say, people are bringing their tablets, their smartphone, and their laptops to work, and then going home with those devices with potential confidential data on their hard drives. So how can you manage that? That's also part of your whole plan. You cannot just look at private cloud isolated. That's why defense in depth is very important, because it will align all your strategies and everything that is around your private cloud, and allows you to create a single plan to put in place and how to defend each layer and how to protect in case that data goes out. I mean, if you lose the laptop, there is any remote wipeout mechanism on the technology that you are using. How can you protect things that you do not have the physical control anymore, you know?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it sounds to me like the issues don't change all that much. In fact, as you say, it becomes a little bit more complex, because I think in the private cloud sense, we're talking about some of the things we discussed earlier about different aspects of delegation of authority in different areas, and at the same time, we still have the same needs of keeping data secure. And the example I think you used is great. The data on disk needs to be secured, and having, as you mentioned, technologies like BitLocker, even in a clustered environment for shared storage, to be able to know that if those hard disks get in the wrong hands, I know that data is safe, because that disk looks unformatted otherwise. So new technologies that support that, but also then the new options, like you mentioned, the fact that more and more devices that we don't necessarily have control over, yet want to give our users the ability to use and securely give them access to information without actually necessarily putting that information on their device for the non-managed devices. So that kind of leads me to a question about where my biggest concern should be. And I think, Tom, you alluded to this earlier, but I know there's certainly big security implications in different areas and different layers of this defense in depth model. Where is currently the biggest concern with regard to security, and does this change with the private cloud model?
Well, I think that if we go back to the previous discussion regarding isolation, there's a tie-in with identity and access management when we think about isolation, because when we look at the private cloud and the private cloud infrastructure, what we're really looking at is a conflated or consolidated environment. So while we're not yet what I would call a single pane of glass in terms of managing the private cloud, that's the aspirational goal, and I'm confident that we'll be there in the not too distant future. This introduces a problem where the traditional silos of compute, networking, and storage, where the network guys could handle their routers and switches completely separate from the storage guys who handle the storage arrays and the SANs, versus the server guys who handle the servers themselves. They were very siloed and partitioned in their environment and how they managed it. In the private cloud, these three groups now are going to probably end up using the same interface, and we can see the beginnings of that in System Center Virtual Machine Manager. The risk is that people from these various groups, I'll say inadvertently, make a change to something outside of their core competency. So the networking guys might poke around in the storage stuff and blam. So this goes back to delegation of privileges and role-based management, so that our private cloud infrastructure and solutions management architecture has to take into account that we must have this role-based access control. Otherwise, we're setting ourselves up for something bad to happen.
Yeah, definitely. So that is interesting, that this shift in tooling and understanding, people still need to be experts in a particular domain, and understanding where those are and where those areas may cross or where those lines might blur is going to be a very important part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much again, Tom and Yuri, for this discussion. I think people have gotten some good information, some things to definitely think about with regard to security and how it relates to the private cloud, or how the private cloud then changes the discussion, or at least adds to the discussion around security. So I appreciate that. Where can we send some people to find some more information about this topic?
Well, we do have a page on the TechNet wiki, which is part of our TechNet Private Cloud Solutions Hub, that people can go to and obtain more information specifically about private cloud security, and our blueprint for private cloud security, our design guide, operations guide. We have everything in there. And again, since this is a TechNet wiki, people also can contribute with content. So the URL is aka.ms/PRISEC, pre-sec, right? It's pretty easy, just go there. And again, we really encourage the community to go out review and suggest changes. This TechNet Week page we decide to publish out there because we believe is a great way to have the community participation on those articles.
Excellent. Good resource. I appreciate you sharing that with us all. Yuri Diogenes and Tom Shinder, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
great.
Kevin.
And we'll see you next time on TechNet Radio Cloud Innovators.